All right. Well, welcome, guys. My name is Momo. I'm with the Bureau of Erotic Discourse, and this is going to be creating safer spaces at Burning Man. And welcome to our little workshop here. Noah is with the Bloom community. I'll go ahead and let you talk on that since you're the CEO.
Well, I just remembered that my title was supposed to be creating safe containers, and we were going back and forth until Momo explained that containers has a completely different connotation when it comes to Burning Man. So creating safe containers is maybe not what we wanted to name it. And yeah, I'm like a big proponent of creating safe spaces, and that's kind of like the main goal behind Bloom is to create safe spaces for counterculture people. And when I joined as like the CEO a month ago, I was like, this is like my dream is to get a bed into our platform so we can share this knowledge in a scalable technology way. So I'm super grateful that you agreed to do it. We had about 60 people who signed up and that will get the recording. So I'm really excited to be able to share it. So thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for having us here and having so much of our Burning Man community here. So going into an overview for anyone that watches over this, if you have never heard of Burning Man, it is an event that is in the desert. It's not there right now. It's currently being built. It's a 80,000 person gathering from people all over the world. And we go there and we build our own camps. So a lot of the people who are in this Zoom call, they are part of a camp where they care about safer spaces, where they have either raised their hand to be somewhat of a camp lead when it comes to the topic of consent and keeping that safe container of their camp safe at Burning Man, because it is a sandbox is the word that I like to use, where you get to go and explore yourself, potentially other people. And there's a lot of interactions and art, and it could be very overwhelming. 80-mile-per-hour wind, structures potentially falling down. We try not to with civic responsibility, but we break it all down at the end after having amazing experiences and meeting new families. We build this home and then bring it all back home, or sometimes put it in an actual shipping container to be stored. So with myself, my name is Momo. I'm on the board of the Bureau of Erotic Discourse, or better known as BED. And BED is a sexual assault prevention service underneath emergency services. We are 100% volunteers. We are a camp ourselves, so we are considered a work camp. And the work that we do is trying to teach people about sex positive consent education. We believe that the education is prevention. And what we did beforehand was we would go over to other people's camps and we would go and give other camps a bed talk and kind of go over 40 minutes, sometimes longer, the topic of consent, what is and is not okay. And that was awesome. It was effective and people appreciated it. I felt like we needed more. And because of COVID and the shutdown, everybody got into this Zoom environment and the idea emerged, why are we training 50 of our camp members to go out to all of these other camps? Even if they give 10 talks, we can't hit 100% of the camps. And if we're just training new and sometimes returning volunteers every year, why can't we train anyone else and put it online and make it accessible, not just for Burning Man, but for the real world itself? So when Noah came and said, hey, let's do this for our Bloom community, it's alternative people, it's kinksters, it's polyamorous people, it's gay people, non-binary, what have you, for them to get together and potentially host events, it felt appropriate and very in line for some of the things that we as consent ambassadors and BEDucators have been working on. So with, sorry, my headset was going off and talking at me in my ear. Hopefully you guys didn't hear that. With Burning Man and the whole culture that we call our home, the way that that is built when, say, Burning Man itself isn't there is by 10 principles. So the principles are things that we as a culture have agreed upon that is important to us. Biggest one that's an easy example would be leave no trace. So if someone leaves a giant bag in the middle of camp, and you're that camp mate and you see this, you're probably going to go over to that person and be like, what is this moop matter out of place on the ground? Like, you need to clean up your shit, right? Because that's one of our principles. Participation is another principle as well. We don't like a term called sparkle ponies. So if you just go to Burning Man and you're not going to participate in, say, either the build or cooking a meal or doing an ice run or gifting, which is another principle, then the culture itself can't really be sustained in some way. So with these 10 principles, it's more the mentality that we have chosen and willingly agreed upon with our own counterculture, that is the Burning Man community. So with leaving trash on the ground, that's a problem, right? And by combating that problem, we've created the principle leave no trace. And then we as the community agree that we want to make sure that everybody else is agreeing to this principle of leave no trace. With the 10 principles of Burning Man, the official ones are only 10. With BED, we believe that there are 11 principles. And the 11th principle to us, we believe, is enthusiastic consent. So if trash on the ground is a problem, the problem that called for consent being the 11th principle would be sexual assault or rape. So usually the word rape kind of gets people, it doesn't feel good, right? It's so harsh, and we don't like to think about the things that can happen out there when it comes to the extremes of someone getting sexually assaulted to the point of rape. So what we have done is we've gone into what consent means, because consent doesn't always mean sex, right? There's things that you consent to every day. You're joining the Zoom call. No one forced you to be here. You said yes to this. You said yes to being recorded or taking off your video. So we're consenting to things all of the time. We're not looking for rapists out there. We're looking for people to have a baseline of respect. And so if you have a baseline of respect, that's just regular consent, right? Enthusiastic consent is something that we really push for, because there's things like coercion or manipulation with our social conditioning that we've had in the past. So enthusiastic consent and checking in on people to make sure that we're still giving them at least that baseline of respect, and hopefully enthusiastic consent to things like the food that they want to eat, or if they are ingesting something that might change their mind in some altered way, they need to be informed about what that is. And especially when it comes to sex, we need to make sure that we are getting that enthusiastic consent from people and checking in to make sure that they are still with us, enjoying things, because it's such a complex, unique thing that we have as humans. If you eat something that you're allergic to, that can send you to the hospital in a physical way. And that also turns into a mental trauma. Like, it literally goes to your brain. Sex is even more complicated than that. So what we like to do is start when we're just interacting with people, like with our friends, with hugs. Is someone autistic and they hate being touched? How do you know that that person hates being touched? We ask them, right? Ask, the answer can be hell yes, and anything less than a hell yes is a hell no. So that's part of the education for prevention, with making sure people do have that baseline of respect. So with consent not equaling sex, it's interesting when you start thinking about why consent is important. We've gone over, like, hey, there's sexual assault, and hey, there's medical issues when it comes to someone's food, or just like myself, like, I want to be safe enough to be myself, and I hope other people are going to want to be around me too. But say if I do something where it's like, I'm going to take my consent to be around Momo because she's annoying me right now, that's okay. I don't need to take it personally as rejection. Thanks for taking care of yourself, is the attitude that we like to have. So whys are extremely important, and we all have a why for anything that is important to us. If you're here, you probably care about harm reduction, safe spaces, and consent as a topic. So I would like to get your voices. This is where I do like to share the screen. Give me a second. And I'll have people come off mute if they want to participate. And if you've watched the BEDucated program, you've already seen an example of this in a meeting. If you have not watched the BEDucated program, what we do is a why, who, what, when, and where related to consent, with the first question being, why is consent important? So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor for anybody that would like to give their opinion and their feelings on why is consent important?
The first Burning Man I ever went to, I got lost. I thought I was going down a street, and then I wasn't going down a street, and I realized I was going into some like little neighborhood and everything, and I turned around just as this guy started fucking this woman, and I had no clue whether it was consensual or not. If this was in my camp, I'm assuming that I would notice what was going on and make sure it looked like it was enthusiastic consent before I would stop over and say anything. But it was definitely a shock to see how open and rapid sexual encounters can happen.
Right. So it's more like a shock to you, and then
Well, it's a shock
you never
in that,
know.
I mean, I guess I'm coming from a place of a lack of experience. And so the camp that I'm going to be at is a lot freer than I have been in my own personal life. So I want to be able to observe and, be respectful and understanding. We're not like an open sex camp or anything like that, but it's just sort of a nuance how you like come upon things and stuff. It definitely, the camp that I'm going to is the first time I've been there and stuff, and they've had, people like, doing stuff on the common areas and things like that. So I'm just interested in how you navigate that.
Yeah. Okay. Would this be accurate to what you were saying, having containers with spoken boundaries for your own camp? Was that what you were getting at? Just
Yes,
because
a
of your
little
feelings
bit,
of
a little
shock?
bit.
Mhm.
We don't want to have like, a lot of signage and everything like that, but given that it's a camp it's a sassy camp, that's all I can say. And you know, navigating, like this, our camp space, I think we can cultivate what we want. But sometimes, like with my first Burning Man, it was like a random thing, and I was like, wow, is that a consensual thing that I'm watching, or was it not a consensual thing? And how do you deal with that? I guess I'm really going to deal with my own camp stuff, but maybe you have to deal with it all the time.
Got it. Something wrong going on, and my grammar and punctuation is not going to be on point. Okay. So thank you for sharing that story. So there's things that you want to maybe potentially not be shocked by in your safe space at your camp with boundaries that you have, which is a great point. Like, you wouldn't want open sex going on at kids camp. There's boundaries there. You can't, right? So your camp can have those boundaries as well. You get to build your home. So thanks for sharing. And we could just shout out answers too, like go for it.
Someone wrote in the chat, consent is important as it allows for everyone involved to feel respected and to be their authentic selves.
It allows everyone involved to be their authentic self and be respected. Great. That is an amazing reason why consent is important. Who else?
I think consent's important because it kind of allows myself and the other participants to go in a slower pace. And I mean, you could say like, oh, can I kiss you? If we're just talking about that, it's like, well, where and how many kisses and all that. It clears up the fuzzy unknown of what opportunities could arise.
Great. Clears up unknowns. Thank you. Who else?
Someone said,
And
it,
I love that it's, sorry, I'm on my phone thinks I'm in safe driving, I'm driving somewhere, so I it's not letting me adjust a number of things. I love that you asked the question, because it's like one of those, should go without saying, but let's think about it. And I also love that the group is thinking about the positive reasons, like, oh, because it enables, if you obtain consent, then you can be more free, but you also know that the other person is participating with you, and sort of it's fostering the it's fostering the communal part of that. And if we don't have the communal part of that, we don't have what we're really, I think, trying to grow. And I was seeking to try to phrase this in a positive fashion, because so many of the other phrasings are kind of avoiding the negatives as opposed to engaging the positives. But there is, of course, always the avoiding the negatives, because there's just a lot of pollution that we don't want left around. So socially, psychologically, karmically speaking.
Great. I like engaging the positives too.
someone else wrote in the chat, it's important for the consenter to know and take responsibility for the boundaries they set. For the person giving consent. Yeah.
Good point, and very hard to do sometimes, especially since it changes.
I feel
Great.
like consent is important to maybe avoid regrets.
Whose regret? I think that's important. That's on the negative. That's on avoiding the negative, but making sure that it's clear for both parties.
Yeah, right. To like act freely, right? Or to act with like trust.
Because it's also the giving of consent. The question is also a little vague. I think there's the person asking for it. They need to ask for it to receive it. But the other person probably also wants to. If they didn't, the other person might. It's a good idea if they make it explicit. And I guess it gets to, hey, who's got which responsibilities touches on, hey, who's going to pick up the slack, to make sure that consent comes from somewhere.
Good points. I'm liking this. Okay, let's go over what we as a group have come up with. So we have a story of getting lost at Burning Man, walking down the street and seeing a guy having sex with a woman and wasn't sure if it was consensual sex or not. It was also a shocker because not used to seeing people out going and banging in the middle of the open. So it might be things that we encounter at Burning Man. So it's thoughts to have for the container that you want to create. That is your camp and the boundaries that you would like to have. We can cultivate what we want. How do you deal with things that might have something wrong going on? It allows everyone involved to be their authentic self and to be respected. It allows myself and other participants to go at a slower pace. It clears up unknowns. If you obtain consent, then you can be free. It fosters the communal part of consent. We can engage the positives. It's important for the person giving consent to know the boundaries they want to set, to avoid regrets. Clear for both parties, to act with trust, to act freely. They have to ask to receive. It's good to know who has the responsibility. Wow, you guys are hitting the heavy hitters up front. I like it. Leave it to the burners. So these are whys that you guys have come up with. This is not something that I could have prepared, and it's different every single time. This is part of the exercise that is in the BEDucated program as well, for the person who decides to be the one who creates these boundaries within their container that is their camp. And it's also getting the voices of the people that you are going to stake your tents down next to. So it's important to know why consent is important to you, because it might look differently for everyone. Just like every time I've done this exercise, it's never been identical. So another important question, we won't go through all the why, who, what, when, and where, is what is consent? Floor is open.
I think at least partially consent is a conversation around boundaries to build trust and a feeling of safety.
Good one. Anyone else? I'll throw one in there. It's an agreement.
It's an ongoing discussion.
A little bit harder of a question.
It feels like it's also partly explicit, like it's not just tacit.
Tacit, did you say?
I said tacit.
Oh, tacit.
Yeah,
What does that mean?
Silent, unspoken.
Ah, got it.
Because that's where misunderstanding comes up.
Sure. And there is nonverbal consent. That is one portion of what consent is, right? So
it doesn't necessarily. Oh, that's interesting, because this is where a lot of gray zones come in. You know,
right.
Outside what we're trying, hopefully, to. Which, that's where the misunderstanding is. Oh, I did this and you didn't say no, so I did it again, and that's exactly. I think that's one of the classic problems.
100%. We just talked about it up here, right?
Yeah, I mean,
didn't know if it was consensual.
it doesn't have to be verbal. It's like somebody approaches with something and the other person pulls them in, to pulls them in, that's it pulls them closer. It can be encouraging gestures or whatever, but it still needs to be there somehow.
Yeah, 100%. And with what is consent, because there are so many different types of consent, and this is something where we're getting to the edge of where the bubble is, right? And we're being artists with trying to figure out what is the most ethical way that we deal with consent while trying to explore or trying to act freely or being able to engage the positives, right? And is it every single time, man, now I have been married to my partner for 20 years, I have to ask him for a hug every single time? There's different types of, like, say, standing consent or consent. Bam, or blanketed consent, some people say. So that's like, hey, you have consent to hug me anytime, slap my ass whenever. We're friends like that. It doesn't mean that you need to be like a Nazi. I'm sorry, I'm trying to not use that word, like super strict about being or asking other people every single time. Because I have friends, or I have a roommate where we cuddle on the couch and we don't have to ask, because we've already had the conversation that as long as I'm not utterly obliterated and you're not being inappropriate with me, yeah, I would love to like have this ongoing, you don't need to ask me unless you have like a spidey sense, that gray area that maybe I'm in a bad place and I don't have the ability to speak up for myself at the time. Maybe I went out that night or something, or I'm just over the top overwhelmed. So it is being kind of a buddy, because we want to look out for each other with this really like gray area topic. So what we've done is we've tried to create a extremely simple 3-step program. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right after we review what we talked about. So what is consent? Partially, consent is a conversation around boundaries to build trust and safety. It's an agreement. It's an ongoing discussion, explicit, nonverbal, and a definition would be standing consent. Actually, I do want to keep sharing my screen because I have my slides that I will pull up for you guys. We shall present. So with this discussion, and I really enjoyed what you guys brought up because it's some of the harder things that people maybe have trouble talking about. Like I heard a little bit of who's responsible for consent. The person that you're always responsible for is yourself, right? And when we go into these countercultures where, let's be real, we're probably not going to be of sound mind and body all the time. This isn't us getting a consent talk at work, right? Where it's mandatory and it has to be done once a year type deal. This is something because we care about consent because we know the environment that we're going into, and there's a lot of loose ends out here. So it's guidance on how to be a better burner for the people who are out there and to learn more about ourselves and how we feel about consent. So we'll go into the BEDucated program itself. So we have a consent enforcement process, and this is how we create these safer containers. I want to let you know right now, it doesn't mean being the consent police. So if you think it's going into that, we're totally going a different route. So we're going to go over the definition legally, what is consent, and we're going to go over how can we create safer spaces at Burning Man. So if you are going to Burning Man, this is specifically with your camp is what the BEDucated program is. Then we're going into that 3-step consent enforcement process of how we can do that as a leader known as a BEDucator. So there's a reason why we do this as well. I don't know about you, but I would love to have people wanting to come back to my camp because they had a good experience. We want to retain those friends that we made. And if you're not, it's a good opportunity to ask why as a camp. If there's poor leadership or if people are having incidents that aren't being addressed, which is why we go into accountability. So getting into the definition of what is consent, it's a voluntary agreement to another's proposition is one definition. The second one is to voluntarily agree to an act or proposal of another, which may range from contracts to sexual relations. So a voluntary agreement is something where if you take the example of a contract, you don't just go to signing the dotted line, right? It's a discussion going back and forth on what is going to be on that black and white line. We're not going to be busting out contracts or anything unless you're into that sort of stuff, if you have colors and whatnot. But when it comes to the ongoing discussion of what we specifically would like to do, that's what we're trying to get us being responsible for ourselves to try and voice things on what we want and knowing what it is. But if someone can't do that, a lot of us have spidey senses where we can detect that. So it's good for us to ask if somebody else is feeling maybe they're going too far, or maybe someone is intoxicated. So we go over the definition of enforcement, which is to give force or to strengthen or to urge with energy. With the consent enforcement process, I believe consent equals respect. So that's the baseline of respect. And the example that I like to use is, say if you're driving down the road and you're trying to get to your destination, it's really simple. If everyone's following the rules of the road, if someone goes through a red light, now you're putting people in danger and you can hit another car, you can hit a family, and there could be repercussions for not doing the baseline of respect for the road. When it comes to consent, if you're feeling like you're coming up to a yellow light, that's where that check-in comes in, and you should start asking questions, especially in an environment like Burning Man, so you can be more informed yourself, and it's taking away not just the risk of potentially harming someone else, but also not harming yourself. We don't speak in genders here when it comes to consent and respect. When we're going into a place like, say, if it's a bar and both people are intoxicated, what we suggest, especially if you don't know this person, you don't have an active sexual relationship, even if you do talk about it, there is a risk involved to hooking up. Like I have had drunk sex before, right? with a partner that I've been with for 3 years, one day could turn around and say, I wasn't into that at that point. So it's always a risk that when I decide to do it, right? So when we do this, we want to make sure that we're of sober mind and body, especially with new partners, because consent violations can happen easier when you don't know the person. And it does still happen in relationships. So it's always good to keep checking in. With Burning Man and trying to create these safe spaces, we want to show our people, like with our camp, I want to show our campers as a lead that we care so much about them. We're going to get their allergy information. Do they need an EpiPen? Where are our emergency services? Those are things that we want to pre-plan beforehand because we can't pick up the phone and call 911 when there's an emergency. When it comes to consent, even if you're out in the real world, there's not a whole lot of support anyways. So we're creating this at Burning Man for us to take out back into the default world, in the real world for our Bloom community people. So when are we doing this? When are we practicing consent? Everyone says all the time, obviously, right? But there's different times where consent can be a more hot topic, or there is potential for people to be more vulnerable, like if you are throwing a party or having a gathering. So if you know that you're going to have more people coming into your space, that's where you want to ensure that you have people at the camp level. They're not emergency services, not professionals, right? But they're ensuring like, hey, do you want someone having sex out in the open in your camp? No. Then someone needs to be the eyeballs there to ensure that that boundary is being respected, right? So who can practice consent is another thing that we're going to go over. Is a definition of a consent ambassador, and we'll get into it with more specifics. So with our house, I want to really break it down. So starting at the beginning, we talked about Burning Man is guided by 10 principles, and that's kind of like our blueprint in our thought brain, with us including the 11th principle into our pre-planning before we have our physical space. So bed is 150 by 200 square feet of space. That's our finite space, and our finite time is Burning Man. We have a Think Pink party for the BEDucators that are all across Playa. We're going to toast some bubbles. And we decide at this point, because we just invited thousands of people over to our camp, maybe some people show up, some people don't. We're going to prepare for a lot of people. And that's when we are going to have the volunteer position of a consent ambassador. So we want to cultivate a space that we know at the camp level can be safe before reaching out to the next capable individual. We'll go over what that means. So with our gathering, there are rules at other people's camps. So just like how you were saying, Inga, like if you don't want people having sex, that could be a rule. Orgy Dome, I really like their rule of you're going to get a consent talk before you go into the tents. They like to keep it clean. You have to go there with a partner if you're a single male. And if you try and take a picture in there, since they gave you a teachable moment or a consent talk at the door, they'll just smash your phone so you don't go home with pictures. Pictures are huge at Burning Man. I have a story of a friend unnamed who was in a tutu on Tutu Tuesday, and that picture got out to some of his competitors, and he lost clients in the real world. So
my very first Burning
Mhm.
Man I went to was in 2000, and I went on Critical Tits. I had my breast painted, and it was a really big thing for me. And Kyra Wilshire caught me on video, on a photo, and it was on the internet. My very first Burning Man.
That's a perfect example on why we ask, especially with photos or anything else
It
in
was
this
Critical Tits
environment.
bike ride.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry that that happened because we're really big, especially with recordings like this. Want to quadruple check that your face is not on here if you don't consent to it.
No,
So
but I get it. I mean, it just happens like all the time and everything. And I'm watching people now. I have friends who do like Instagram and everything, and they walk up to people. They see people, they want to take their picture, and they walk up to them saying like, "Hey, I want to take your picture, and I'm going to put it on Instagram or whatever. Is that okay with you?" And that's how that should go.
100%. And we like using pictures as example before getting into like the harsher stuff too. So thanks for sharing your story on that one. And when we get into the consent enforcement process, we're going to give you some tools. So when you're in that moment, you can refer back to the tools that we give you in this program. So thank you.
Thanks.
No problem. So preparing your people, you guys are doing that right now. You're having a discussion. You're reaching out to people who have put years of experience. BED has been around since 2004. So this has been longer than anyone on the leadership team because it is a problem that people are trying to solve. If you guys have feedback, I said it earlier, maybe before some people hopped on, we're looking for your feedback as well to have the discourse on these high level topics that are very complex and give you some guidance. So the consent ambassador is someone that knows the consent enforcement process. So when you guys all come over to Think Pink on Wednesday at 6:15 in E, we're going to have consent ambassadors. We like to make them visible. They have pink vests. They're also known as our NOAA when we're not doing a gathering in case you need to go to someone for help. We make sure that they know that they got to keep the roads clear in case there's an emergency and the ambulance needs to use the road. Can't have blockages. So let's maintain that. That's how we're going to prepare our people. And we have a love pod. So the love pod is a place where you can go and make love inside. We especially want to let people know, like, hey, consent is specific. It is retractable at any time. Anything less than a hell yes is a no. Here's some condoms and come is moot. So clean up your shit. You know what I mean? So this is how you can have a specific volunteer that is going to ensure the safety of other people and at least be eyes on the floor. So that doesn't mean that they're going to be handling all of these harsh things that could pop up that are outside of their control. There's capable individuals such as, say, the camp leads, and they're just people too. So if they don't know how to handle something that is even more high level than a street blockage, that's when you can call for a ranger who has a radio. That line of communication does go to authorities. That's not my first pick, but a ranger comes over and mediates a situation. So they come to a conclusion, kind of like writing a contract, and then they come up with a solution. So it's like a consent talk itself. Depending on the situation, you might need to go to medical, Zendo, and there's also the SAT team, which is a survival advocacy team that's at Burning Man. We'll go over that later in our resources as well. The consent enforcement process. So BED's definition of being a consent ambassador is someone who knows the consent enforcement process. For those who are looking for specifics, this is what it is, and we will go into details of each of these steps. I just wanted to overview it really quick for right now. So when you're out there and you're walking down the street and someone is having sex with somebody else outside and you're not sure if it's consensual or not, we have a step one, and this is bystander intervention. It's called the hey, how's it going? And the hey, how's it going is an easy way to unassumingly check in on other people. So if there's something going on that you're like, I'm not sure if this is okay or not, a hey, how's it going is a way to investigate the situation without making yourself look like an ass in case nothing was going on that's wrong. So say if Igna came over and gave a hey, how's it going? They're like, what's up? Yeah, we're just having sex. A lot of the times when we're thinking something's going on that's wrong, it's usually not, in my experience, in the event production world, especially if you're on shift and that's what you're doing is looking for things that are incorrect or going on that's wrong. So we want to check ourselves and make sure that we are not assuming and going over and checking on the situation. And the reason why it's so friendly like this is because if there is something going on that's wrong, we don't want to escalate a situation and make it worse. We want to try and de-escalate a situation, or you just met a new friend by saying, hey, how's it going? What's up, burner dude? So burners check in on each other. A simple, hey, how's it going is not trying to, again, be the police. This is like, hey, are you okay? In a very simple way. So step two is the most important one. And this is called the teachable moment. So we had, I'm sorry, I didn't see your name when you were speaking, but you had talked about there's gray areas out there, like when we were talking about nonverbal consent. So the teachable moment, when we have been trying to pin down, how do we tell other people what to do? Like, is it you can only touch this person's ass when it's 6 o'clock on Friday in a dust storm? That doesn't make sense. So this gray area of the teachable moment is allowing people to have their own body autonomy. And our culture stays an ask first culture because a lot of people don't know how to stand up for themselves. With the teachable moment, you can do this if you feel comfortable. It is somewhat of like a mini confrontation. A lot of people feel empowered when they do this for themselves. So it's just teaching the boundary. So if you broke it down and simplified it, took away that long-winded explanation, the teachable moment is verbalizing the boundary, and it's drawing that line in the sand. So if someone does come up to me and then they smack my ass and it's okay within their camp and all these people have standing consent, but it wasn't okay for me that day, I can go, hey, how's it going? We had a moment. I didn't really appreciate when you smacked my ass back there. I know it's okay with all of you and your campers. I just want to let you know that it's not okay for me, because there's different ways that people might feel about an interaction like that. You'll see it a lot at Burning Man. It's going to be okay for some people where they invite it, they enjoy it, they like it from strangers, even though we should be asking first. And there's others that are like, you just sexually assaulted me with your hand touching my ass. So it's the risk, right? We're responsible for ourselves. We are responsible for asking. So we're not putting ourselves in jeopardy to somebody else's body autonomy and what their lines are. When we see other people that can't verbalize the boundary, what we would like to see everybody doing, and this is what we do, is we go over, give a, hey, how's it going? Check on the person that looks uncomfortable, confirm that that's the case just by asking them questions or kind of getting a feel for the situation, and verbalize the boundary for them. When the boundary has been verbalized, then that person knows their line is there. So if you cross it again, then we start looking into the third step, which is removal. So removals, depending on the severity of it, can be a temporary removal, like, hey, you need to go over here and take a break right now, or you're wasted and you're kind of making a mess out of everything in camp. Why don't you go sleep it off? To if you're doing something illegal and unforgivable, then you look into permanent removal processes. Removal is something that not everyone is going to be that capable individual for. So that's where we get the support of your camp leads to make a decision if it's not something that can be done on the spot, or you might need to get rangers, or say if somebody snapped their collarbone, you're going to need a medical professional, right? And go to emergency services. What kind of help do you need? Are you able and willing to provide that? No. We need to know our resources beforehand, so that way we can look out for our community better by doing the pre-planning. So I'm going to pause right there because I know we went over a lot, and we are going to go deeper into the, hey, how's it going? The teachable moment and removal. Do you guys have any specific questions where we'll pause for like 5 minutes and chat? Nothing? Okay, I must be explaining really well. I'm sure there'll be questions at the end. We'll do a Q&A if we have time. So with having these processes in place, you have a build lead, right? And you set up the build. You want to have a strike plan. And if you have a successful build and no EMT structures fell on any campers' heads, they're probably want to come back next year because you had such an awesome build lead. When you have these situations that have even been voiced in this Zoom call, like seeing people having sex or videoing someone who's getting their tits painted, and then that picture going online, if people are stepping in and you're standing up for them, you're going to get that retention because it shows that you care about what happens to that person and what their feelings are. So your people don't care how much you know until you show how much you care. So I want to build my home to be the world that I want to live in, especially as a woman, right? I want to be able to be safe to go walking down the street at Burning Man. I feel great about it. I feel empowered when I'm able to do that. And I also feel when there's not a maybe safe camp that I'm around, and I'll go the other way. So like maybe you don't retain me because there's a bad vibe that's happening, or there's people not being safe. So if you're caring about safety and retention of your people, this is where you get to define what that looks like. So we talked about removal. Accountability is something where it gets people maybe a little anxious because they don't feel like they're the ones that can do the removal process. And that's where the planning of your people comes into play. So who holds the people accountable? It depends, right? Anyone can do a, hey, how's it going? And there's so many people at Burning Man. We have 80,000, maybe not this year with all these extra tickets, but a, hey, how's it going is just not being a bystander. And if made a percentage, but it's close to almost always 99% of the time, what you think is going on that's wrong actually isn't. This is a very safe thing that anybody can do as a consent ambassador. The teachable moment is a practice that anyone can also do as well. But what I like to encourage is if you're not feeling comfortable enough for that teachable moment, you want to know the resources and the places where you can go to find somebody who can help. With our 10 principles and someone maybe leaves trash behind, that's something where we probably wouldn't invite that person back into our camp again next year. For our 11 principles, we have accountability reporting at the camp level. So nothing that needs to go to like a professional. So you've got a broken leg, you're going to EMS, right? If there's someone who's being annoying with consent and it's a teachable moment that you can give, if you're giving teachable moments to the point where like your temporary or permanent removal is like you can't come back to camp, that's something that our camp leads can decide with the support of each other. It's really important to get that support from the rest of your camp leads when making these decisions, because it's not a fun thing to do, right? If you're in the title of leadership, you don't just get all of the praise and thanks for doing all this work. You also handle the incidents, right? And having a pathway for your campers to be able to do that is something we have found our campers really appreciate. With our camp, we have taken it a step further. Leadership also has to have radical accountability as well, right? So we have this position, our camp leads in training, better known as our CLITs, our secondary level of leadership. And the camp culture lead, if someone in our camp sees me doing something wrong as a camp lead, the camp culture lead is there to give me a hey, how's it going as the voice of the camp. And then if I need a teachable moment, it's keeping me accountable. So if I'm having multiple teachable moments, then it's looking into my temporary or permanent removal. So no one is entitled. So we're going to go into the hey, how's it going a little bit deeper with examples. And this is where I would like participation if you guys have questions, because this is us going to Burning Man and something that you can be practicing yourself. So with the hey, how's it going? Is it pretty clear? I'd like one person to come off mute and explain to me what the hey, how's it going is. Or put it in the chat.
I think you just stop. I haven't done this workshop before, but in my hypothesis, it just like stops the flow. It allows like enough space to like think about what's happening and take a step back. So it's like a good way to not push too hard or get into a conflict, but to create like space for everyone to like pause.
100%. And when you do give a hey, how's it going, it could diffuse a situation that might be going on that's wrong. And maybe your spidey senses don't pick something up.
Totally.
And that's another powerful thing that we all can do with this simple task. With hey, how's it going? I like to, hey, how's it going myself? Because maybe I'm exhausted from building our camp and I'm not in the place where I need to tap on Danger Kitten, who I believe is still in this chat, another one of our board members, and ask them to go over and give a, hey, how's it going for me? Or maybe I'm emotional and I need to give someone a sorry for what I said during build week button or something. So it's it's much easier to do a hey, how's it going when like you're in a good state of mind. So if you decide that you are capable of giving this hey, how's it going, then go ahead and execute on it. The example of the hey, how's it going that one of our consent ambassadors has done in the past, and what I really enjoy using because it's funny as hell, is during an event we had a consent ambassador noticing someone going over into our speakers and they thought that they were trying to steal shit. And when he was like, hey, how's it going? He like turned around and his pupils were huge. And he was just like, it's going great, guy. Like, yeah, what's up, buddy? And he's like, okay, well, that falls into the 99% of the time. I thought you were doing one thing and it was the other. So silly example, probably what you'll see. So I challenge you guys to give a hey, how's it going when you feel like someone else is doing something that's wrong, just to get the phrase in your brain, because it's a harmless thing that happens. If you do find that you need to go on to a teachable moment, this is also a practice where make sure you're the capable individual that can deliver this step too. So with the teachable moment, we want to teach that boundary, and it is kind of like what I covered, already got into the details in the last couple of slides. With the line being drawn in the sand, someone can't say that they don't know that what they're doing is incorrect anymore if they have been told that that is not something that is okay with the camp. That's blatantly stepping over the line. And there's still gray areas when it comes to, do we just kick somebody out of camp then if they do something twice? That's where you get to decide and really check on your own feelings on what is the severity of this. I like to go just mentally, is this like a level 1 teachable moment? And it was something like, oh, this person gave me a hug and I really didn't want it at the time, and it's just teaching them for other people. I'm a big hugger. Or is this like a level 3 where you stole something and you're out the first time? Like, stealing is wrong, just like, sexual assault is wrong. So those are things where you start going into a much harsher removal process. So with removal itself, when you're a TCO, a theme camp organizer or leader for the Bloom community, if you're hosting an event, I would always have a group of people, or if you're doing a smaller event, have a second host. So that way you have the support on what it looks like to remove somebody. You should never do this yourself if you are deciding that you are the person that is going to be removing someone and you don't know how someone is going to react. With the, hey, how's it going type of attitude and energy that you bring, you want to have the same type of energy with removal. You don't want to like grab someone and be like, you're coming with me, where it might initiate some sort of fight. It's more of, let's unemotionally walk you to the edge of our camp. You're no longer allowed to hang out here. Maybe it's only until like you have not been drunk anymore. It's up to you, because there's so many different scenarios that you might come across. To have this simple 3-step process is something that you can fall back on as a tool. So make sure you check your surroundings as well. So if you're on deep playa, you really don't want to do removal without the source of a radio, which is why it's important to go to a ranger. So you guys know the consent enforcement process now, which by BED's definition makes you a consent ambassador. So we're not in a volunteer shift right now where we're making sure we're keeping people out of the street and behaving themselves. You just know the hey, how's it going, the teachable moment, and the removal. So thank you for being a consent ambassador, being here and educating yourself. This is also one of our board members. Our consent ambassadors get handed a paddle. So we offer, hey, do you want a friendly wave, a hug, or would you like a paddle spanking? And they get trained with the paddle. So most people go for the paddle. So tactical. Oh, did someone have a question or want to make a statement?
Thank you. It's great.
Okay. I can't. Yeah, go ahead.
What if you host like an event and someone comes in and then they didn't do anything that like violates consent, but other people come and say like, oh, this person is like a known, consent violator or something like that? What do you recommend doing around that?
Great question. So my background is a venue manager, right? And we have people all from the Burning Man community, from colleges, and there's people that know, hey, Momo also is part of BED, obviously cares about consent. We created this at the last venue that I worked at, and that would happen. So what we have done with our consent ambassador team is we would ask for a photo of the person if they had any like evidence when it came to like written reports or their name, and we'd have a chat that would be going on every single night. So if it was hearsay, we would let the ambassador team be aware of what the hearsay was, and then we would keep an extra eye on that person. Because they came into our building and this was a legal business, there wasn't anything that we could specifically do, because there would be so much hearsay, not just with consent issues, but if you do it in our house, then that's something that we're aware of if we see that behavior is starting to fall in line with what people are giving us as the hearsay. Because we can't control everything, right? You can always believe someone's story, and everyone, if they feel a certain way, their feelings feel true to them. So we don't want to tell someone, no, that's not how it happened. How do we know? We weren't there on either side of whatever story. What we can do is look out for someone that maybe needs to get more information with what they're doing, a teachable moment, and keeping our safe containers safe. Because you can't fix all of Burning Man. Trust us, we tried, which is why we're reaching out to camps to create safer spaces by your definition and sharing the knowledge that we have. So that's what we do, is we take the information, share it with the people who are acting as the consent ambassadors, not security, or like the peer-to-peer support that's there. Was that helpful?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Got it. So your camp is now a more safe space with prepared people, and then you leave it. You're out on deep playa and you're by yourself and something goes on that's wrong. And now you don't have the support of your campmates next to you who have the same ideals as you, and you still want to be supportive to other burners. The capable individual is something that you always want to check with first. Hey, how's it going yourself, right? If it's something that you can go in and give a, hey, how's it going to someone else while you're out there without support, that's up to you, right? Your consent, your body, with what you feel comfortable with doing. If you don't feel comfortable knowing the capable individuals like rangers and knowing the location of where you think harm's going on, it never hurts to go and get a ranger and have them check on something. I had a friend last year tell me they were riding on their bike and they saw an art car with a woman on the ground, and there was two men, and she looked passed out, and he got a weird feeling. He ran over to the rangers and they checked on it. And that's how we can support each other without putting ourselves in harm's way. So know your resources. If you're in a group of people, if Danger Kitten's still in here, this is their favorite tactic. If they're needing help and it looks like there's maybe a fight going on, it's really starting to escalate, and the person that's needing help is needing to go, removal could be going over and like, hey, buddy, like I haven't seen you in forever. Can you come to the restrooms with me? And removing the person from the source of what the potential danger or escalation is. So that way you can get them some help, let them cool off, and hopefully not have an incident at all. And then you're just supporting someone who's going through a bad mood. So with EMS stations, if you remember 9, 3, and C, there's portals at 9 and C and 3 and C. So those are going to be some of your closest resources if you're out on deep playa and you're needing assistance. The rangers are there, Zendo is there. If you come across someone who's utterly out of their mind and need to get walked over to Zendo. Zendo is peer-to-peer psychedelic support. So if you need to just kind of get away from the overwhelming environment, they have trained volunteers there to help people that maybe need a friend or maybe really need to get water They were lost in deep playa. It is good to get nosy. If someone's kind of being a dick and you're like, this guy, or like if you have maybe had hearsay that someone has been problematic and you see them out and they're acting a fool, what our consent ambassadors have done before in the past is ask to take a selfie and get their information, get their name and their camp name so you can take it back to their camp leads. So that way they're at least aware of it and making decisions about that specific camper. So that's totally up to you if you're wanting to go this extra mile, depending on what the situation is and how annoying someone might be or dangerous. It's important to get the picture and let leads know about it for the safety of their camp, because burners look out for each other. Great. So the BEDucated program, there's only a few more slides and I can't see the time on where we're at. I know we started a little late. So we're going
Okay.
till 6,
Yeah, we have 12 more minutes. We're
12
at
more minutes.
17 minutes after.
Got it. Okay. And if you have to go at 6:30 or beforehand, no problem. We'll get the recording to you. The BEDucator program, if you are not the BEDucator of your camp, this is what your BEDucator for your camp has gone through. So they just informed themselves of the 3-step process, the consent enforcement process to become a consent ambassador. And then they got into a meeting with the theme camp organizers. So if the BEDucator in your camp is doing this program and asking you to watch the program itself to educate yourself, they might not actually be your camp lead. We have BEDucators who have never been to Burning Man. We have people who work for the org. There's people with airport camp. Like there's literally 5,000 buttons that we need to hand out where they are doing this BEDucator program, which is insane. And they're just volunteers. They're people like you and me. They're curious. They want to know how they can create these safer spaces. And then they take action. So if you watch the videos and didn't take action, this is what your BEDucator did. So when they got into the meeting, just like what we had done with why is consent important? What is consent? So who can practice consent? They did all of that with their leaders, and it's kind of an intimidating thing to do if you don't know who your leaders are or this is your first burn. The whole point of getting that discussion going and bringing up hot topics, negative topics, the positive topics is so your camp can create its unique consent policy. So this is your discussion and your discourse on what's important for your camp and what your boundaries are. A lot of people are just adopting BED's consent policy and then adding their own flavor to it. We did this with our camp yesterday or 2 days ago. My days are blending. So this consent policy has gone across the playa for believing that consent is the 11th principle. And we actually just updated it because one of our campmates made a really great point. So we're going to read this page. We won't read the next page because we've already gone over the information. So BED's consent policy for Burning Man is, we believe enthusiastic consent is the 11th principle of Burning Man. We believe we can show people how to express themselves by normalizing the conversation surrounding consent. When our community feels as comfortable discussing consent as they do discussing food, everyone will benefit. We believe that consent works best when discussed up front by having the conversation before anybody steps foot on playa. We strive to foster trust and understanding so that everyone can, 1, feel safe to explore sexually or otherwise, 2, confident about expressing boundaries, 3, empowered to speak up, 4, we're conditioned to hearing no and thank people for taking care of themselves and knowing enough about themselves to have the ability to do that. Consent for any physical engagement, touching, hugging, dancing, getting someone to drink, etc., is required from everyone within our camp. Without a freely given, specific, informed, and enthusiastic yes, there is no consent. Consent is always reversible and retractable at any time. Violations of an individual's boundaries may result in a teachable moment or immediate removal from camp with the potential to never again be allowed to return. So this is what we are promoting across the playa. And for people that are wanting to go more so into the definitions of what consent is, like when we were talking about nonverbal or standing consent, it's right here. is freely given, specific, informed, enthusiastic. So those are things that consent is, and it is also reversible and retractable at any time. So no more, it's not, oh, it's just about to bust, give me 15 more seconds. It's no, you stop right then and there, especially for sexual situations. We're really, really big on allergies. We don't want to see anybody dying. This is because we care so much about our campers. Everyone's going home, and we want them going home with positive experiences. We want them coming back next year because they had such a great time and we looked out for them. So we don't need to go over all this because we just did, right? The problem resolution process for Camp Bed is the same exact thing that the consent ambassadors do, but at the leader level. So if we need to give a, hey, how's it going? Someone comes to us, or if we see something, we give a, hey, how's it going? If we need to give a teachable moment, that's something we feel comfortable doing as leaders. If there's something extremely wrong that's going on, sound like an opera singer. If there's something extremely wrong that's going on, and we've had to exercise this within our own camp, we will get into a meeting. And when it gets more serious, this can take a long time and go on for months, is the reality of the situation, especially at the leader level, which is why we have that voice of the camp, which is the camp culture lead. And we name everyone and we put pictures of who we are. So that way other people know who to go to, especially with this camp culture lead, if they need to say something, say about me, and they want to voice it. And I am extremely intimidating because what's Momo going to do if I want to come to bed next year? They're our voice, or they're the camp's voice for addressing our behavior. It's really important to have, because leadership, let's talk about power dynamics, right? The leaders, if they feel like they're untouchable, then they basically are. And that's not something that's okay with us. So if it's something that's okay with your camp, then the camp culture lead might not be there. Anyone who's being BEDucated, this is an important step to have in your camp. I know we're like leaving next week or in almost 2 weeks for burn. I would find someone that will volunteer to be this position. We pair it with being the fun person in our camp too, the one who cultivates all of our outings, or if they have something where another camper is giving a talk at center camp, they get everyone all riled up. So they're trusting, like people trust this camp culture lead because they've gotten to know all of our campers and they know that he has their back. So incident reporting, we have reports where they go to us as the camp leads. It, again, if it's a sexual assault or something like that, it needs to go to what's called the sexual assault. Lord, been talking too much. The SAT team. So it's a survival advocacy team. It's located at 615 in Esplanade. It's almost like Zendo, but for people who have been sexually assaulted. And they have rape crisis volunteers there. They do that either as their professional job, at least have 40 hours of on-the-job experience to deal with those sorts of situations. Your camp leads, myself included, are not prepared to deal with that type of situation. It needs to go over to the professionals. I do want to let you guys know that Nevada is a must report. So if you are going over to the SAT team, if the survivor wants it, then they should have the informed consent of what that process looks like. So Burning Man will file the report. We have a separate report that is for the camp culture lead, and that way I can't read it, and neither can the rest of the bed heads, so the board of directors of bed. And then he will come to us, and this is a channel that we use after Burning Man, so we could address anything that has gone on that's wrong and hold us accountable. With the BEDucators themselves, they have gone through this program. They have created their unique consent policy. And what they do now is they give a bed talk at Burning Man. Words are extremely important. People are looking for direction. So when you get into your early camp meeting, once you hit burn, you are going to be explaining the work that you have done and telling the rest of your camp what your consent policy is, who you can go to if you need support, and about that camp culture lead, plus the capable individuals, which are the SAT team, the Rangers, and the emergency services. So if you guys need a PDF of that, I can totally get that to you. Just email me at momo.keller, spelled KELLAR @gmail.com, or bedburningman@gmail.com. So we'll wrap this up. This is the last slide. We have some future efforts and goals. So at the beginning of the call, we had talked about there's other camps and other events that go on in different states. So if Burning Man is the big umbrella, there are regional burns, and we're from Arizona, and we've had an incredible amount of support from AZ Burners. They have made BED a department lead at the state level. So when there's things that do happen, we will get consent ambassadors at the gate for our regional events, Saguaro Man. And it has been extremely effective for people to get that foreshadow of what our culture is like, especially when it's fun with a paddle or just saying like, you don't need to touch other people. We have these red bracelets. This is actually from Saguaro Man. So if someone does take a photo of you and you don't want it posted, you accidentally were in the background, it's supposed to be deleted. And it's just extra support that we have with us. So that's a tool that you can also use. Another goal that we have is for Burning Man to adopt consent as the 11th official principle of Burning Man. So we are continuing to work on that by getting in touch with rangers and regional directors, where there has been a ton of response from many different regional leads that want to mimic Arizona Burners and having a BED lead at the state level or the regional level. For those of you like California have a ton. The biggest thing in my goal is to have a BEDucator in every single camp. It doesn't take long. Some people have done the BEDucator program, done the meeting, the TCO, Theme Camp Organizer meeting, came up with their consent policy, adopted ours, and then sent it out to their camps, and they're doing their BED talks at Burning Man. They've done it sometimes within a single day. Some people do it in bite-sized pieces. We've broken up the videos for you. You can watch them at different speeds. There's no reason why one person can't get with the rest of their camp leaders and be a BEDucator in every camp and show that we care about our culture. It's something so important for me, for other people to have this feeling of empowerment and healing and knowing that we have each other's back, because I have felt that way within BED itself. We're learning every single day. I've said it 1,000 times on this call, like if you guys figure something else, like write us. We want to learn with you, and we want to help like create these spaces. Or if you're having a problem, we want to be your BED buddies, right? We will sit, we've gone on video calls with people having consent issues with stuff in their camp, walk them through it, and was like another person where they can bounce ideas off of on how to do problem resolution with, hey, how's it going, teachable moment, and removal. So thank you guys for listening. I know we had some tech issues in the beginning, but we got through it. And yeah, I'm excited. We're buying conduit earlier today. We're leaving on either Friday or Monday, depending on our logistics guy. So that's a lot of talking. Man, I'm feeling winded.
Well done, Momo. I feel like
Yeah.
you need a 10-hour drive now to the playa to just chill and listen to music.
Yeah. Well, we're practicing talks on the way up there. So it looks like we're just at about time and slightly over, but that was the last slide. I'll take the screen share off. If you guys have any questions, feedback, we love feedback, constructive criticism or other. Positive feedback's great too. All ears.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if people either on the chat here or on the chat on Bloom, if people want to like share their safe spaces and safe events. Like I'm really curious if we could have this as like a badge of kind of like quality as we walk in the burn and know what events have gone through and what camps have gone through this workshop.
And Christian, to answer your question, what is Bloom? Bloom is hosting BED. So they're a dating app for kinksters, polyamorous, non-binaries. And Noah is the CEO here. They invited BED to come do this workshop, which is why we're here.
You can find us on the App Store. Next year, I want to integrate Bloom with the burner map so you can find all the events and all your friends in the same place. That would be sweet.
Excellent. And I wasn't able to see the chat when I was screen sharing. So you had some good points up here. Christians, yep. Sexual assaults are a must report. Do SAT team members have to call in law enforcement? Great question. That actually came up within our camp as well. And because I wasn't 100% sure on the answer, I emailed the head of emergency services and I'm waiting for her response back. We have to pick up our driving pass. So if you want to stop by 615 and E, I'm going to ask her the question when I grab our driving pass, and I hope to have that answer for you, but I don't want to give you bad information. Applying it in the moment. It's a practice. You remember, hey, how's it going? Teachable moment. The lingo's like that I like to use is, hey, we had a moment. And then go into what that moment was. The verbal tools are super helpful inside of the moment when you kind of freeze up.
I didn't catch. Sorry, I didn't catch it. On site, is there opportunity for like, oh, let's role play, let's practice this out?
I'm sorry, I didn't. Can you say that again?
Oh, this was a interactive, but primarily sort of like one-way information feed and folks absorbing it. And role playing, is a powerful way to sort of solidify and say, oh yeah, I get that. Okay, yeah, I see. Practice things out, kind of like taking the plunge, but in the wading pool. I don't know if there's opportunity for that on site.
Yeah, if you come by 615 and E, we can totally do that. Our camp has all been BEDucated. It's a requirement within our camp. And we are here to have the discourse. We don't have anything set up. Since we switched over to the digital environment, we have less interactivity inside of our camp at BED. Another great resource is Orgy Dome. So Orgy Dome does a ton of consent talks. They've been another leader of Burning Man and consent for years, and they obviously practice consent and have lots of opportunities to within inside of the Orgy Dome. So that's a great resource as well. I'll totally role play with you. Hell yes. Write a list of the easiest and worst situations that you think might happen in your camp and work through those with your fellow camp leads. Know the outcome before it comes up. Great. Good exercise, Christian. Kind of looping back full circle with, so those are things on, we hope to not see a ton of incidents while we're out there, right? A majority of this is just preparing our people. So when it does happen, you have these tools to fall back on. Going off of you, Christian, you reminded me of an exercise that I like to do for myself. It's very hard. If you take a piece of paper and you write 10 things that you want, especially in a sexual, more sexual connotation, it's actually very hard to do. Once you start getting to like 5 or 6 and getting really specific, knowing 10 things that you can say that you want from a sexual partner is something that you can prepare yourself for you and your play partner. Interesting too, it's usually different between men and women. Men will more so have like specific sexual acts where women will have more feelings in general, just generalizing there. So switching, what do you emotionally want, 10 things, and what do you physically want, 10 things, are great to know. I would try it. Well, if anybody else doesn't have any questions or comments, we can go ahead and close it out. I really appreciate you guys popping on and doing this with us. The full BEDucator overview in an hour and a half. Thank you. We're going to shut them down. We'll see you in the dust. Thanks for making the bed. Mwah.